Moving on. There comes a time where you have to move on. Sometimes you're forced to. You experience the death of someone you love and you have to move on without them. Sometimes it's by choice because you have to be proactive to move away from an unhealthy situation that's either toxic or you're not growing. Those are really two of the major scenarios that you'll be faced with. One is you're forced to move because of circumstance. Someone passes away, or you're forced into a situation where you have to change and you have to move on without something. And the other one is you're proactively moving on because you realize you're not in your best environment, personally or professionally. And if you realize at a certain age, hopefully younger than later, that if you're not proactive, you'll be reactive. And when you're reactive, you're on defense. And if you spend your whole life on defense, even if you're the greatest defender in the world, you have to score points to win the game. So you have to be offensive. You have to be proactive at some points in your life, or else you don't move forward. You don't score any points per se. But either way, whatever situation you'll find yourself in, the whole psychological challenge of moving on is centered around a couple different emotions. First is there's initial excitement or relief about moving on, because one is, as an example, if you were dealing with someone who passed away, you may be at a point where you see their suffering, whether they've been suffering a long time or not, and you don't want to see them suffer. So there's a relief when maybe they pass away, and obviously that could be tied into an emotional guilt because no one wants to wish death on someone, but you feel relief initially about moving on because you certainly don't want to see people suffering. But then there's the finality of moving on, meaning that, once that death settles in your mind, the finality of them not coming back, that's when the real work begins. Okay. And that's because that's when you get stuck in the mud, weeks, sometimes months. You never really heal from a loss. You never heal from a loss, but you do find joy again. It's just different. Life is different. Never stays the same. But I want to just say the message and keep it simple, not over talk it, is that when you're faced with the finality and you're in the mud of moving forward, like, if you could visualize you walking in the rain, you get caught in a muddy trail, and now it's hard to move forward. Initially, you're going on a walk, it's exciting. Initially, you're moving forward from someone or something, as the first example of death, and there's a relief. Okay, they're not suffering, I can move forward. But then you get stuck in the mud as you go down the trail of life, and you're faced with, first the guilt, then you're faced with then you're faced with the finality. Oh my God, like, even if I can get out of this mud, I got to move forward by myself. And there's loneliness there's despair. All those things are part of that road. But here's the crossroads of life. If you go back, one is there's nothing to go back to. So going forward is really the only option. If you stay stuck, if you just sit down, and sometimes you do need to take a rest, but if you rest too long, like napping too long, it disrupts your cycle of sleep. And if you sit too long in life, if you're not going forward or backwards, and you just idle, it's the devil's playground, idle time, devil playground. You got to move forward. That's the whole sales pitch. You got to tell yourself, well, I got to go forward because there's nothing to go back to, number one. Number two is if I stay in the same place too long, I'm just going to get beat up from memories of the past. And life's going to keep kicking you. You got to move forward. That's the sales pitch. And then the other example of you proactively making change in your life, separating from a relationship. Look, people are patterns of behavior. Okay. So if you've already seen, personally or professionally, that there's a pattern of behavior that keeps a spirit of fear, toxicity, it's not going to change. It's only going to repeat that pattern. And therefore, the only way to get out of it, the only way to move on, is to be proactive. You voluntarily forcing yourself out of that situation, knowing that there's risk in going to the unknown, knowing that there's no guarantee, but knowing that you refuse to stay in an unhealthy situation. Proactive. And it's the same mindset of when you're forced into change, it's like, well, if I stay here, it's not going to change. It's a pattern of behavior. Two is, I believe in hope, but I don't believe in hoping in someone will change and not changing yourself. If you're in a situation, personally or professionally, and the only thing you can do is hope it changes, that's dangerous, because what you're basically saying is, I'm not going to do nothing. I'm going to sit my big ass here and wait for someone else to change. Oof, it's dangerous, man. You got to change yourself. You got to change your circumstance. Proactive. Proactive. Say it with me and pronounce the P. Proactive. You got to be a pro. Okay. Not amateur night. And you got to proactively move forward to the unknown. But you know you could do bad all by yourself. I mean, you could do so much better, but you gotta move to the unknown. And that's the message, okay? Personally, professionally, dealing with a loss, whatever it may be, moving forward. I hope these words helped you in some way. Ultimately, we all got our own journey. Thank you for watching. See you next video.